If you look at a map of Western Europe, Belgium and the Netherlands sit right next to each other. Two small, flat, rainy countries, sharing a border, sharing a language, and sharing a whole lot of history. So why are they two completely different nations? Why do Belgians bristle at being called Dutch? And why does a country the size of Maryland somehow manage to have three official languages, nine parliaments, and a national identity that most of the world still finds confusing? The answer goes back centuries to empires, revolutions, religion, and a deep sense of pride that still runs through every corner of this little country today. The land before Belgium. To understand why Belgians are not Dutch, we have to take a step back, a very big step back, to a time when neither Belgium nor the Netherlands existed at all. Not as countries, not even as ideas. Picture Western Europe over 1,000 years ago. No neat borders on a map, no passports, no flags, just land, flat, marshy, river-crossed land, and the people who lived on it. The whole region that today includes Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg was loosely known as the Low Countries. The name simply came from the landscape land that sat low, close to sea level, much of it reclaimed from water. But do not let that simple name fool you. This was not one people with one identity. Far from it. The Low Countries were a mosaic, a patchwork of tiny duchies, counties, and independent city-states, each one fiercely proud of its own dialect, its own traditions, and its own local ruler. The people of one town barely had anything in common with the people two valleys over. There was no shared government, no shared language, and certainly no shared sense of being one nation. Unity was not something these people knew or particularly wanted. But underneath all that local pride, there was a much older, much deeper divide. One that went all the way back to the fall of Rome. When the Roman Empire began to collapse in the 4th and 5th centuries, a Germanic people called the Franks began pushing southward through this region. The Franks who stayed in the north in what is now the Netherlands and northern Belgium kept their Germanic tongue. That language, over many centuries, slowly evolved into what we now call Dutch. But the Franks, who kept moving south, deeper into what is now France and southern Belgium, did something very different. They mixed with the Romanized people already living there, people who spoke a version of Latin, and over time, they gave up their own language and adopted the local one. That language eventually became French, and so, right through the heart of what would one day become Belgium, a line formed. Not a wall, not a fence, just an invisible boundary between the Germanic-speaking north and the Romance-speaking south, a cultural fault line drawn by the movement of ancient peoples across an ancient land. Here is the remarkable thing: that line has barely shifted in 1,500 years. The villages on one side speak Dutch, the villages on the other speak French. That ancient divide is still there today, as stubborn and enduring as the land itself. Everything that came after every revolution, every war, every political argument grew from that very old, very deep divide, ruled by everyone except themselves. If there is one thing that shaped the identity of the Belgian people more than anything else, it is this: for most of their history, they had absolutely no say in who governed them. None. The people of this land were passed from one foreign ruler to the next, like property changing hands at an auction. And each new master left a mark that would never fully disappear. It started with the Spanish. In the 1500s, the powerful Habsburg family of Spain took control of the southern Low Countries. Now, the Spanish were far away, ruling from Madrid, speaking a different language, living a completely different life. But they brought something with them that sank deep roots into the culture of the South. They brought the full weight of the Roman Catholic Church. The Spanish were devout Catholics, and they made sure the people under their rule stayed that way. Churches were built, the faith was enforced, and over generations, Catholicism became not just a religion in the southern Low Countries, it became part of the very identity of the people, something they wore like a second skin. Then the Spanish grip loosened, and the Austrians took over. A different dynasty, but still foreign, still distant, still making decisions for a people they barely understood. Then came Napoleon. In 1794, French revolutionary forces swept through the region and absorbed it entirely into France. And Napoleon, more than any ruler before him, was determined to remake everything he touched. He did not just want to govern these people, he wanted to transform them. Under French rule, French became the only official language allowed in public life. In the courts, in the schools, in the offices of government, French and French alone. If you wanted to get ahead, if you wanted to be taken seriously, if you wanted to be considered educated and respectable, you spoke French. And it worked at least among the upper classes. The elites, the wealthy merchants, the educated professionals of the South gradually adopted French as their preferred language. It became a symbol of sophistication and status. Speaking the local Dutch dialects began to feel old-fashioned, rural, even embarrassing to some. By the time Napoleon was finally defeated at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, a battle fought, of all places, right there on Belgian soil, the southern provinces had been transformed. They were Catholic where the north was Protestant. They were French-influenced where the north was firmly Dutch. Centuries of different rulers had pulled the south and the north in completely opposite directions. These were no longer simply two halves of the same region. They were two different worlds, and someone was about to force them back together. Force together the United Kingdom of the Netherlands. When Napoleon finally fell, the powerful nations of Europe gathered together in the Austrian city of Vienna to do what powerful nations have always loved to do, redraw the map to suit themselves. It was 1815. The long, bloody era of the Napoleonic Wars was over, and Europe's leaders were exhausted. They wanted stability. They wanted order. And most of all, they wanted to make sure that no single country could ever again grow powerful enough to threaten the whole continent the way France had. So they sat around their grand tables with their maps and their wine, and they started rearranging borders. One of their decisions concerned the Low Countries. The northern provinces, what we now call the Netherlands, had long been an independent Dutch-speaking Protestant nation. The southern provinces, what would become Belgium, had spent centuries under Spanish and Austrian rule, and most recently under the French. The two regions had grown apart in almost every way imaginable. Different languages, different religions, different cultures, different attitudes toward just about everything. And yet, the great powers decided to push them together into one single kingdom. The reasoning made sense on paper. A large, united kingdom in this part of Europe would serve as a buffer, a wall of sorts, between France and the rest of the continent. If France ever got ambitious again, this new kingdom would be the first line of defense. Strategically, it was clever. Humanly, it was a disaster waiting to happen. The new country was called the United Kingdom of the Netherlands, and it was placed under the rule of a Dutch Protestant king, William I, of the House of Orange-Nassau. For the people of the north, this felt perfectly natural. He was their king, speaking their language, sharing their faith. But for the people of the South, Catholic, French-influenced, and proud of it, this new arrangement felt like an insult. King William made things worse almost immediately. He was a man who believed firmly in his own way of doing things, and his way was the Dutch way. He pushed to make Dutch the official language of government and administration, even in regions where French had been the language of educated life for generations. He promoted Dutch citizens into positions of power and influence, while the Southerners felt overlooked and undervalued. To the people of the South, William was not their king. He was just another foreign ruler who did not understand them and did not care to try. They had been ruled by the Spanish, the Austrians, and the French. Now they were being ruled by the Dutch, and they were rapidly running out of patience. The night an opera started a revolution. What if I told you that one of the most important revolutions in European history was sparked not by a battle, not by an assassination, not by a great political speech, but by a night at the opera? It sounds almost too strange to be true, but that is exactly what happened in Brussels on the night of the 25th of August 1830. The opera was called La Muette de Portici, which translates as The Mute Girl of Portici. It told the story of a people rising up against their Spanish oppressors, fighting for their freedom against a foreign ruler who had no right to govern them. For a Brussels audience already simmering with 15 years of frustration under King William I, the story felt less like fiction and more like a mirror held up to their own lives. Then came the aria, a powerful, soaring piece called Sacred Love of the Fatherland. The singers poured their hearts into it, and something in the audience broke open. People began to weep. Then they began to shout. And then, still fired up from what they had just heard and felt, they poured out of the theater and into the streets of Brussels. What started as applause became protest. What started as protest became riots. Windows were smashed. Factories were stormed. The city erupted. And it did not stop there. The unrest spread from Brussels outward, rippling through the southern provinces like a fire finding dry wood. The Flemish in the north of Belgium and the Walloons in the south had spent generations speaking different languages and living in somewhat different worlds. But in that moment, none of that mattered. They were united by something deeper than language. They were united by faith, by frustration, and by a shared feeling that they had been controlled by outsiders for far too long. King William sent his army, but it was too late. The people were no longer afraid. By the night of September 26th, after days of fierce street fighting, the Dutch troops withdrew from Brussels in retreat. It was over faster than anyone could have imagined. On the 4th of October 1830, a provisional government stood up and declared the independence of Belgium. Europe was completely stunned. That very same year, France's famously sharp-tongued foreign minister, Talleyrand, had confidently declared, "There are no Belgians, there never have been, and there never will be." He said it as if it were simply a fact of nature. Within months, thousands of ordinary people had proven him spectacularly wrong. A new country had been born, and it had been born of all things on the power of a song. A country born from contradiction. Belgium was free. The revolution had succeeded. The Dutch king had been pushed out. Independence had been declared. And a brand new nation was ready to take its place on the map of Europe. It was a remarkable achievement. A small, unlikely people had stood up and won. But now came the hard part. What exactly was this new country going to be? From the very first day, Belgium was built on a contradiction. The revolution had been fought by two very different groups of people standing side by side, the Flemish in the north, who spoke Dutch, and the Walloons in the south, who spoke French. Together they had driven out a king they despised. Together they had bled in the streets of Brussels. Together they had declared themselves free. But the moment the fighting stopped and the politicians took over, the unity began to crack. The new Belgian state needed an official language, and the choice they made was breathtaking in its unfairness. They chose French, not Dutch, not a combination of both. French, the language of the Walloon elite, the language of the educated upper classes, the language that carried prestige and power. French became the tongue of the courts, the government, the army, and the schools. And Dutch, the language spoken by more than half the population of this brand new country, was not just ignored. In schools, it was actually banned. Think about that for a moment. The Flemish people had marched in the revolution. They had fought in the streets. They had helped build this nation with their own hands. And now, in the country they helped create, their children were forbidden from being taught in their own language. They were, in the most painful way possible, sidelined in their own home. It was a wound that would take well over a century to heal, and in some ways, it never fully did. But here is the deeper truth about Belgium, and it is what makes this country so utterly unique. Despite all the tension, despite all the inequality, despite all the contradictions baked into its very foundations, Belgium sits at one of the most remarkable crossroads in all of Europe. To the north, in the region called Flanders, Dutch is the language of daily life. To the south, in the region called Wallonia, it is French. And tucked away in a small corner in the east, along the German border, there is a quiet community of German speakers, making Belgium home to 3 official languages in a country smaller than the state of Maryland. And at the very center of it all sits Brussels, the capital city, officially bilingual, French and Dutch, together a place where Europe's past and Europe's future seem to exist in the same breath. Belgium was not born clean. It was born complicated, and it has been complicated ever since. So are Flemish Belgians just Dutch? Here is a question that seems simple on the surface, but opens up a whole world of history, pride, and identity the moment you ask it out loud. About 60% of all Belgians are Flemish. They live in the northern half of the country, in a region called Flanders. They speak Dutch, they read Dutch, they watch television in Dutch. If you closed your eyes and listened to a Flemish person speak, you would hear something very close to what you might hear walking down a street in Amsterdam or Rotterdam. The language is the same family. The words are largely the same. The grammar is identical. So surely, the Flemish are just Dutch people who happen to live on the Belgian side of the border. Do not say that to a Flemish person. Just trust me on this one. The Flemish will tell you, clearly and without hesitation, that they are not Dutch. They are Belgian. They are Flemish. And those are two very different things from being Dutch, no matter what the language might suggest. Calling a Flemish person Dutch is not just factually inaccurate to them, it is offensive. It dismisses centuries of their own distinct history, their own struggles, and their own hard-won identity. But what exactly makes them different? If the language is so similar, where does the difference actually live? It lives in the details, and the details are fascinating. Take something as simple as the word for you. In the Netherlands, the formal version you has almost disappeared from everyday speech. It sounds stiff and old-fashioned to Dutch ears, used only in the most formal of occasions. But in Flanders, you is still used warmly and naturally in daily conversation. It does not feel formal at all, it feels normal. Then there are words like G and G, the Flemish way of saying you in casual speech. In the Netherlands, those words exist only in old poetry and ancient texts, the way English speakers today might come across the word thou in the Bible. But in Flanders, people say them every single day without a second thought. Same language, separated by centuries of different experience. And then there is the matter of personality, which is perhaps the most telling difference of all. The Dutch have a well-known reputation for being direct, refreshingly honest to some, blunt to the point of rudeness to others. They say what they think, quickly and plainly, and they do not spend much time softening the edges. The Flemish are different. They tend to be warmer in how they speak, more careful with their words, more attentive to how something might land before they say it. Centuries of living alongside the French-speaking Walloons with their more indirect, more gracious way of communicating quietly rubbed off on the Flemish in ways they may not even fully realize. The complicated country that worked. If someone sat down and tried to design the most complicated country in the world, they might end up with something that looks a lot like Belgium. 3 official languages, 4 separate language areas, 6 different governments operating at the same time, federal, regional, and community levels, all running simultaneously, each with its own parliament, its own ministers, and its own budget. A capital city that is officially bilingual but functions mostly in French. A country where the language you speak determines which schools your children can attend, which television channels are considered yours, and sometimes even which political party you are expected to support. On paper, Belgium should not work. Political scientists have studied it for decades, shaking their heads in quiet amazement. There have been moments, serious, prolonged moments, when it seemed like the whole thing might simply fall apart. In 2010 and 2011, Belgium went an extraordinary 541 days without a functioning federal government. That is nearly a year and a half. And the country kept going. The trains ran. The hospitals stayed open. Life continued. That alone tells you something remarkable about the Belgian people. The tensions between Flanders in the north and Wallonia in the south are real, and nobody in Belgium pretends otherwise. For much of the 19th and early 20th centuries, Wallonia was the economic powerhouse, its coal mines and steel factories driving the wealth of the nation, while Flanders remained largely agricultural and looked down upon. Then the tables turned. The coal ran out, the factories closed, and Flanders emerged as the economic engine of modern Belgium. Today, Flemish taxpayers contribute significantly to keeping the poorer regions of the south afloat, and not everyone in Flanders is happy about that arrangement. There are political parties in Flanders, serious ones, with real support that argue the time has come to go their own way entirely, to split the country, to let Flanders become its own independent nation and let Wallonia find its own path. These are not fringe voices. They sit in parliament. They win elections. And yet Belgium endures. Perhaps it endures because of Brussels, that extraordinary, chaotic, magnificent capital sitting right on the language border, home to the headquarters of the European Union and NATO, a city where French and Dutch and English and a dozen other languages swirl together every single day. Brussels has become something bigger than Belgium itself. It is the capital of Europe in a very real sense, and that gives the whole country a weight and a purpose that neither half could claim alone. Or perhaps Belgium endures simply because, underneath all the political noise, the Belgian people share something that no parliament can legislate away: a dark, rich chocolate that the whole world envies. A beer culture so vast and varied, it has been recognized by UNESCO as part of humanity's cultural heritage. A waffle eaten on a street corner on a cold morning that somehow makes everything feel a little more manageable. Belgium is complicated. Belgium is contradictory. Belgium is, by almost every logical measure, a country that should not exist. And yet here it is, still standing, still arguing, still somehow, stubbornly, beautifully working. In conclusion, Belgium is a reminder that nations are not natural, they are invented. They are built from compromise and conflict, from language and faith, from old grievances and new identities. The Belgians are not Dutch because they chose not to be. They fought for that distinction, bled for it, and built a nation, however messy and complicated, that reflects something real about who they are. The Flemish speak Dutch but do not consider themselves Dutch. The Walloons speak French but do not consider themselves French. And together, these two very different peoples share a passport, a king, and a country that has surprised Europe more than once. That, in the end, is what makes Belgium so fascinating. It shouldn't work. And yet, somehow, it does. If this video made you see this small, complicated, fascinating country in a new way, drop a comment below. Tell us what surprised you most. And if you are new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button and come along for the ride, because there are plenty more stories like this one waiting for you. We will see you in the next one.